G'day and welcome to this new tutorial on top-down adventure game. In this tutorial we're going to cover very similar things to the previous tank tutorial, but we're going to look at them in a different context, make a few changes to the theme of the game as well as the way that it controls. We're also further on going to introduce some simple enemy AI. Now, I've imported a few sprites here. I've imported an enemy Orc King and a few others. I've got these sprites from Rogue Dungeon, and I've scaled them all up by 400% because they are really, really tiny. They're all 8x8 sprites. I've scaled them up by 400% so that they are 32 by 32, as you can see here. So that's the size that they are. They look a bit like realms or some other sprites that you may have seen around. They're not too bad. They're nice little stylized ones. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to run this here. And this is kind of, I've already looked at how to import sprites and so on, and I've just made a very simple example here. I can move this guy, and what you'll notice is that he always snaps on the grid. Don't worry about the backdrops. They are literally just backdrops, but he snaps to the grid. So he can't go off that grid. I can hold the button down and he will walk. So it's kind of, it's quite cool because it allows me to mean that his movement is going to be quite accurate. Okay, he's not going to get stuck on walls or anything. You can see that he can move around that quite easily. That's because there's no walls there, but when there are walls, he'll be able to move through that without a problem. The other thing he can do at the moment is fire in 4 different directions. So I've actually got 2 controls here. I've got WASD for moving, and I've got arrow keys for firing these little arrows. All right, so let's have a look at how we can do this. Now, I've already made the object here, but I'm just going to make a new object, and this one is going to be object player. And I'm going to make the wizard player, okay? Because it's essentially exactly the same, but I've already made the archer, so I'm going to make a wizard player, and I'm just going to rename this guy here object player archer. Okay, so on the wizard, I'm going to have an event, a create event, and this event, I'm going to set up the move speed. So this should be familiar. Move speed equals 4. Now, because the grid size is 32 by 32, that's the size of all my sprites, that's the size of the grid I'm going to use in the room, I want to make sure that this is a multiple of 2, or a factor of 32. So 4 is a factor of 32. It goes in, who knows how many times, but it is a factor of 32. I think 8. 4 times 8. I'm so bad at maths. Yeah, that sounds about right. 4 times 8 is 32. 2 times 8, 16. Yep, 4. All right, so init vars, or init initialize variables, but I know what that means, so that's what I'm going to put there. 3 forward slashes will put that note on there for me. That's a create one, really easy. We're not going to have a turn speed in this. Instead, we are going to use the WASD events and what's called placed snap. So in the next one, I'm going to do all of this in code. I'm not actually going to do it with the keyboard events, unlike the tank tutorial. So in the step, I'm going to do this in code. Player movement. And what I'm going to do is use a function to check whether the keyboard is pushed down, to check whether a certain key on the keyboard has been pushed down or is held down. So to do that, the function is keyboard check. This will check if a key is held down. Now the key I want to check, I need to put inside the brackets or the arguments. The key that I want to check is the argument for this, and it will go and run the function and say, is this key being pushed down? And it will return true or false. So I want to check the key W. That's going to be my up key for the movement. Now I can't just put W in here. It doesn't work. What I need to do is use a function, another function called odd. And this returns an ASCII number for W. And ASCII is the kind of digital representation of these letters. So it'll return that, and then it will check if that keyboard key is being pushed down. Then it will say, okay, it is, so this is true, or it's false. And I need to store it somewhere. So I'm going to call this move, or M up. Okay, so M up equals keyboard check or W. W is up. And then we'll go M down equals, and I'll just repeat this process, keyboard under check, ORD, and S is down. If you don't play many video games, W, A, S, and D are pretty common. In fact, probably the most popular control system around. So left, usually WASD and mouse. We're actually going to use WASD and arrow keys to do the attack. So keyboard check, ORD, A, and M underscore right equals keyboard check, ORD, D. So W, S up down, left is A, D is right. So I've got those there, and what it's doing is this will either be true or false, so it will store the result in here. So M up is either going to be true or false. When I'm pushing W, it's going to be true. When I'm not pushing W, it's going to be false. Now, another thing I want to do is check whether the player is aligned. So I'm going to create a variable called aligned, and I'm going to use another function called place snapped. It takes two arguments, a horizontal snap value and a vertical snap value. Both of these are going to be 32, which is the size of the sprite, and also in the room, it's the default size of the grid. So I want to make sure that it's snapped to the grid. Okay, if he's like halfway, if he's like there, well, it's not going to be snapped to the grid because the numbers down in the bottom left corner down here, when he's there, will not be divisible by 32. So this is a special function that checks, are both these numbers divisible by 32? Is the X value divisible by 32? Is the Y value? And it'll return true or false. So when he's aligned, it'll be true. Otherwise, it will be false. So what we're going to do, if he is aligned, I could write it out like this, but for this, it's going to get quite long to write that the whole time. So I'm just going to check if aligned. If he is, speed is going to equal 0. Now, if I'm not pushing any keys, this is all good. He's just going to stop. But if I am pushing a key, then it's going to go, we're going to go ahead and it's going to override that. So if M up and aligned, we only want him to change direction if he is actually aligned. So if M up and aligned, so if this is true and this is true, then we're going to set his direction to, we're going to make a temporary direction value, temp dir equals 0. Not 0, it's going to be 90 because 90 is up. Now I'm going to write this a little bit neater because the only thing I need to do in here is change or create this temp dir variable. So I'm going to go here and I'm just going to write it like this. Same with this one. There's only one thing happening after each of these if statements, and so I can make this a little bit shorter. If M down and aligned, then temp dir is going to equal 270. That's down. If M right and aligned, then temp dir equals 0. And if M left and aligned, temp dir equals 180. Now, some of you looking at this might think, okay, I've got a whole lot of if statements here. Why don't I use else if? And I could, to be honest. I don't want to use else if on this first one because then once it's aligned, it will never let me unalign it. But it's going to go here and say, okay, it's aligned. So we'll stop. Is the mouse button, not mouse button, is the move up or the keyboard W key being pushed? And is it aligned? Well, yes. Well, let's set the direction to 90. Last thing I need to do down here is check to see if any of the keyboard buttons have been pushed. And if they have, so if M up or M down or M right or M left, if any of those have been pushed, then I'm going to do this here. I'm going to set direction equals temp dir, and speed equals move speed. So we're going to set his direction to whatever direction this is here. Now, if I put I kind of didn't finish what I was saying before. If I put the else if here, what it's going to mean is the up has preference. If I don't, it just means that left is going to have preference. It's not a big deal, to be honest, in this case here. It just means if I'm holding down W, A, S, and D, he's going to move left because that's the last one in the list to check. If I use else statements, it's going to move up because that's the first one and it will ignore the others. It doesn't really matter here. So I'm just going to go on with this. So let's put the wizard in the room. Delete this guy. Put the wizard in. And I should be able to test this. It's pretty easy to test this. I push W and he should stop when he gets snapped to that next grid. He'll slide along for a bit. Hold down W. Okay, and I can just take him over to this area where there's some 32 by 32 tiles and test it. And it all looks right to me. So that part's working really well. Now I am going to make a new sprite here. Actually, I'll make a new sprite. I'm just going to make like a little fireball sprite placing to the right. And then the next video, we'll look at making him attack using the keyboard.